The following is a presentation of KSL Sports. First and 12. A total roundup of this weekend's BYU football and the new look Big 12 Conference. First and 12 is sponsored by Macy's Grocery Store. Your hosts are Mitch Harper and Alex Kirry on KSL News Radio and the KSL Sports Zone.
Welcome on in, Season 2 of First and 12. 16-team Big 12 action. We're going to be breaking it all football season here on KSL Sports, KSL Sports Zone, KSL News Radio. Mitch Harper, Alex Kirry with you, talking all things Big 12 football. It's back, Alex.
Oh, my goodness.
We're ready for another season.
Not only are we ready, at this point now we're very impatient. Like, I'm so freaking sick of all the camp talk.
Yes.
All the camp speak, all the camp cliches. I don't want any more of it. But you know what? We'll deal with it for another week because college football, we get week 0 action. Are any Big 12 teams in action in week 0?
No Big 12 in week 0. They'll get going on the Thursday night, August 29th, with Utah against Southern Utah. UCF will play a game on Thursday night, and then we'll get TCU Stanford on Friday. But no week 0 action for the league, but eventually I'm sure we'll have this become the regular start date when things move up. But it's an exciting year for the Big 12, and it's one where it's a 16-team league, which has an impact on us locally as it brings back the BYU-Utah rivalry. We'll be hitting on that here in this podcast as we preview the season. It was a huge talking point.
Did you write about this maybe? Did you maybe bring this up in any of your articles this year?
Oh, yes. It's huge. And the thing is that it's a rivalry that is going to be the best rivalry in the Big 12. This was Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark on the rivalries in the Big 12 because many are wondering, how are they going to move forward without Texas and Oklahoma?
Well, I think rivalries are critically important. I was thinking about this morning, Utah, BYU, Arizona State, Kansas State, Kansas State, Iowa State, Baylor, TCU, great rivalries. Scott has a scheduling committee that he works with, and they were focused on the rivalries that obviously mean something, not only to the history of the conference, but also to our fans, and I think we landed in a great place.
Brett Yormark, always selling, always be closing, right? You got to always, it's a sales pitch that he's always got going on. And you know what? Between Big 12 Media Day, between all the work that they've done, we can say all we want about Brett Yormark calling him rivalries. And we can say as much as we want about how this guy comes in. And he's a basketball guy. He is a freaking genius businessman so far. And honestly, he's been a massive blessing for the Big 12. Don't tell him that. He already will tell you that. But that's part of the selling part. Listen, this is a conference that last year, despite having Oklahoma and Texas in it, this is a stronger conference now.
Yes.
I don't think necessarily from a branding standpoint. Don't get confused with that. The football is actually better this year than it was last year with your two big blue bloods that are now exiting the conference. And it's not just because things got a little bit – because honestly, Utah is as good or better than both of those teams were and certainly more consistent than those teams were. And I think you could make a case that, Texas could go back to being Texas, which is just overrated typically. Oklahoma really hasn't proven that much. This is me talking trash, by the way, about the guys who exited. I'm like full on.
I'm on that too.
I've accepted like any of our Oklahoma friends we've met in this broadcast world. Like now, you ask them at Big 12 Media Day when we were down there in Vegas, and they're like, "Oh gosh, I can't wait to get those guys out of here." And like they are so sick of having to just have everything revolve around Texas and Oklahoma. It's nice because guess what it does? The biggest rivalry in the conference is Utah and BYU. Day one. Don't try to bring up the Sunflower Series or whatever it is. And Arizona State, no one cares about. People try to bring up, Baylor and TCU. I can tell you,
game.
I can tell you, as a person who grew up in that area, those two teams sucked my entire growing up, and they never were like, "Oh, I can't wait! It's our big rivalry game." I was like, "Good, I'm glad they're getting better." But day one, Utah and BYU should freaking pound this thing and say, this is our conference because this is our rivalry. And, Utah's a favorite for a reason because they're really good. They're going to be really freaking good this year.
Utah, Arizona State, Colorado all join the Big 12. And I think what gives the optimism for this conference, despite losing Texas and Oklahoma, is the 12-team playoff piece. Because without it, I don't know if there'd be a path in the 14 playoff for this league champion to get into the playoffs. So just having that piece of you win this league, you're playing for a chance to win a national title. That adds so much momentum and energy to this league. This was Yormark on what he wants this conference to be recognized as going forward into the 16-team era.
We introduced an updated vision statement for our league to all of our key stakeholders, and for me, it's built around being the most relevant and nationally recognized conference in America.
We'll see if they can become that, Alex, but I do like the makeup, the composition of this conference. It is strange to see Utah and BYU in the same league with West Virginia. I'm still getting used to stuff like that, but I just think this is going to be a highly competitive conference, and Utah is the preseason favorite, 21st place votes in the media poll. 5 different teams get first place votes. It's a balanced league, and honestly, when you kind of dive into this conference, I mean, there's a lot of teams that could be, playoff contenders in this league.
Well, here's the other thing. I can actually draw you up a scenario, Mitch. It's not just about getting your champion in as one of the top 4 seeds in the college football playoff every year, at least in this format, and getting at bye week for that Big 12 champion. I can draw up a scenario without really pulling a muscle about 2 teams getting in. And yes. I know that'd be a stretch, but we've seen crazier things. The SEC and the Big Ten are powerful at the very top, absolutely. But they will eat themselves in a lot of cases. And if you're talking about, there's been a million different scenarios. I saw one this week. The most wild one that I saw was Arizona being the second Big 12 team getting in. And the scenario for that to happen would basically be Utah and or Arizona or Kansas State, or even Oklahoma State. Those are kind of the big top 5 that everybody's talking about. If Utah goes into that conference championship game maybe with a loss, and the other team goes in with maybe a loss, or maybe even in their scenario it was Arizona beats Utah during the regular season, that would mean Arizona would be close to undefeated, somewhere around there, but riding high, and then losing the Big 12 championship game, and then they're still highly ranked. You know what I mean? If you're in that top 10 and if they were a single-digit rank and then by the end they lose to Utah in the Big 12 championship game, you're not going to get dinged that much. Now, they might get jobbed by the College Football Playoff Committee, but it's harder to do that now because you can be a 1 or 2 loss. You can be a 2-loss team in the College Football Playoff the way things are set up now. It's not that crazy to think that 2 conference members of the Big 12 could get in. If it's not this year, certainly in the future, that's the promise is if you have good enough teams at the top, you can battle for not just 1, but maybe even 2 college football playoff positions. That's where you're at right now. That's the reality of where you are, and that means you're getting more respect than even the ACC, right?
No question.
You could draw it up for the ACC for Clemson and Florida State maybe to get in if they have similar type years and similar type paths. But we're talking about everything is trying to battle against the Big Ten and the SEC, and it's a tough hill to climb. But, man, football has just gotten better with this. I am fascinated to see what this college football playoff with 12 teams is going to bring this year.
No doubt, and I think that it's critical to get 2 teams in the playoff from this league because you do not want to be branded as the league that gets only 1.
Think about auto bid, yeah.
When we joke about TCU and Baylor, think back to 2014, the first year of the playoff, the Big 12 got left out. They were the one power conference that was not in the mix. They kind of got branded as this uphill battle year after year in the playoff. Then it kind of shifted to the Pac-12. But the Big 12 has to get on the right footing and have 2 teams in this playoff. And I think it's one of the reasons you kind of saw the Big 12, maybe the schedule makers game the system a little bit by giving
Utah
computers,
and Mitch. That's not that no human touched those schedules.
Utah and K-State got very favorable schedules that they should be in a position to clash in Arlington. Do you think we're just on a collision course to that? As maybe let's dive into the Utes and see what they're going to be in 2024.
Listen, if they, and it's a lot of ifs and it's a lot of question marks. I'm really excited to see on Thursday what they're going to do against Southern Utah because you're going to be able to see live bullets from Cam Rising and Brant Keithy, guys that you hadn't seen on the field in a long time. Think about it. 2022, it was September or October of 2022, 4 games into the season that Brant Keithy hurt his knee. He's been almost 2 years out of the game, right, in Tempe. And then Cam Rising hasn't taken real game snaps since January 1 of 2023. That is a long time ago. And I don't care who you are, that should be concerning. Now, everybody in camp is going, oh, it looks great. We never know. And even against SUU, I think you're going to be able to go, okay, some things are clicking here. Maybe we won't really know until a couple of games in, but I'm telling you, Thursday is going to be a massive eye-opener, and the Utes are absolutely stacked. And we talk about the star players that are on there, but the consistency on the defensive line and how good they are when they coach those guys up. Those are NFL quality dudes with Junior Tafuna. And I do think that linebacking core is as good as you're going to get. As usual, Colton Swan does a phenomenal job at Utah as a linebacker coach, getting those guys dialed in. And Morgan Scalley is a reason he's going to be the head coach in waiting there, because they have their defense is not going to be a question. Even last year when they had a couple guys go out, including Lander Barton for the rest of that season after, week 3.
Yeah.
They're going to get everybody back now. And they had basically 0 injuries in camp, which is a massive blessing because last year they had so many season-ending injuries. And so Utah isn't just poised, they're expected to finish at the top. And if it's them versus Kansas State or Kansas or Oklahoma State or even Arizona, which I'm less high on that, but I think that it's going to be Utah and then everybody else, I think, a little bit after that. But you're right, Kansas State and Utah won't even have to play each other unless it's in the Big 12 championship game.
Kyle Whittingham is definitely ready to get into that game action.
Without a doubt, yeah, it's time to hit somebody else and to compete. And the offseason has become so voluminous now with all the player run practices as well. I mean, they've played a lot of football just on their own, not played, but practiced a lot of football in the last, 8 months. And so they're definitely ready to line up and play somebody.
I do believe this is Utah's best team since 2019. I kind of believe that Utah's best team maybe in the Whittingham era was 2019. They came up short in the Pac-12, but I think one thing that I'm really fascinated by with Utah is they always hung their hat as this, underdog in the shadow of USC. You saw last year what that win in the Coliseum meant to Utah, taking down USC, being in the shadow of Oregon. Those are always big spots where they almost had this unique style that was just so different in the Pac-12, whereas many teams in the Big 12 do the Utah thing where you're physical at the line of scrimmage. Iowa State can do that. Kansas State can do that. Oklahoma State can do that. Now, and Utah now is going to be the targeted. That is a new dynamic for Utah that they've never lived in any conference they've ever operated in, because I think, and look, social media is not real life, but I think this stuff gets back to these teams. We clearly see that. And I think Utah's a circled opponent. That's a new dynamic for the Utes that they never lived in the Pac-12.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point because that's where we like Utah too, because they've always been that underdog. They're always a team, and at some point, I don't know. The reality is when you book your trip to the Rose Bowl 2 seasons in a row and 2 Pac-12 titles in a row, typically you get that respect. But it's not USC, and it's not. It's not these big schools. It's not Oregon. It's not Washington. But now they go into the Big 12. They're the class of the conference. And it has less to do about...
Class of the conference already? I don't know yet if I'm ready to say that.
Oh, you're going to be one of those guys that suddenly, like Kansas, who's never been good at football ever, except for the Mangini... Is it Eric
Mark Mangino?
Mark Mangino?
Yes.
That one Orange Bowl for
07.
them? Listen, who is it then? Kansas State, I don't know. If you're going to have one, the good news is it is hard to pick one because it's pretty well spread around. And I think that should be good for BYU too, because you don't have a super, super, super heavy top of the league, but you also don't really have a really, really poor bottom of the league either. At least you're crossing your fingers and hoping not. But I'm all on board. Utah, until proven otherwise, is the best team in this league.
The thing is that Utah has had 3 straight years of 4 losses or more. They haven't got to the mountaintop as a P14. They haven't won a bowl game since 2017.
That's not Kyle Whittingham's thing. They won so many in a row before that.
I feel like Utah, their style was so different in the Pac-12 that became a tough matchup, and they're going to go into some hornet's nest in this league. That the road venues, it's not Cal, it's not Stanford where there's 40 people and you're playing at 8:15 at night. No, you're going to go into a tough venue. I mean, Houston was the one venue in this league where it's like,
but nobody's writing home about honestly, Utah and BYU are going to have as big of an environmental advantage as some of these other places.
No question.
What do you think is the insane?
Tough.
Rice Eccles is very difficult.
LaVell Edwards Stadium, I think that's one of the saving hopes.
It's getting so much better. It's gotten so much better. So if you're talking about like McLean Stadium, or like if you're talking about, look what they can do down at Stillwater and Boone Pickens Stadium, there is going to be, those communities love their freaking teams. But right along the same lines as I think where Utah and BYU fans are.
Yeah, and I think the thing is what I will give Utah the edge to is what they are. Whereas every team in this league, I do like Matt Campbell. I like Chris Kleiman. I love the coaches in this league, Mike Gundy. but they have some up and down years. Gundy's been pretty stable too.
Yeah.
But man, they were wild last year covering them in this show. It's like every week we're talking about we got them at 10 this week in the power poll. This week we got them at 2.
3.
We can't figure this Oklahoma State team out.
As soon as we put them toward the top of the league, they lose to UCF 45-3 or whatever it was that one week, and we're like, what are we doing in this league, man?
Brett Yormark, though, when we talk about all these teams and maybe the parity, he loves the depth of this conference heading into 2024.
I think there's a lot of parity. We've got 16 great coaches. We've got a lot of star power. When you think about the quarterbacks, you think about the running backs. Many of our programs have been building over the last couple of years. I think it's only natural and appropriate for us to think that way right now. We were a very deep conference last year, but we got deeper, not with the four corner schools. So I'm expecting great things from our schools this year.
He's branding this conference as the deepest league in America, and Utah sits atop going into the 2024 season. I do think I initially thought Utah would be maybe third. I have changed my tune because you look at this schedule. I've got the Utes at 10-2 going through this schedule and making it to Arlington. It's going to be – they will be good. I mean, the floor for Utah, I think, is third place in the Big 12 and just outside Arlington. They are going to be in the conversation. It's going to be a tough out taking down Utah this season. And they've got some questions at cornerback a little bit. I'm curious to see maybe that second unit along the offensive line, but the starters are in place to have a big year for Utah. For BYU, a lot of questions, Alex. I mean, this team – it's just let's go to Kalani Sitake. He's confident they're going to improve in year 2 after a 5-7 campaign in year 1 in the Big 12.
We're not just hoping that what we did last year was enough. We've made some moves. We've done some things differently, and I think I'm excited to see what happens when we get to the season.
How you feeling about BYU this year?
Mitch, you and I spent a lot of time, you especially, talking about covering, studying BYU, and I have no better idea now than I did at spring, before spring, and that's, of course, in a large part due to the fact they don't have a quarterback named. And that's fine. We've seen BYU teams that have done this before. I'm hanging my hopes for BYU fans out there and my hat on TJ Woods and Coach Gilbride,
yeah,
the new tight ends coach.
Mm-hmm.
I'm hanging a lot of hopes on them scheming with those big guys up front to make the run game better, because we could talk all day long about how important it is to have a good quarterback, but it was such an embarrassing run game last year. You couldn't even get a passing game going last year with how bad the run game was, because the teams were like, that's fine. You won't be able to run it against us, and we know when you're going to pass it. We know all the downs are going to have to try to pass it. So that's going to be number one for me. I'm nervous for BYU fan. I don't think that – I mean, listen, 2-7 in the conference last year. I don't think they're that bad. I don't think they're that bad this year. And I want you to picture also the teams that were at the very bottom of the conference, quote-unquote, so to speak, last year. We all think of West Virginia, but we also look at other teams who overperformed. You start to look at some of these – and some of the teams that we were basically penciling in for dark horses. Texas Tech. TCU falls off the edge of the freaking planet, and they were supposed to be really dang good.
Yeah.
So – that's the part of this league that's wild, because no one knows how this thing's going to go. If you think that BYU is going to just rinse and repeat from last year and they're going to have struggles, I don't think that's necessarily the case. You should be bummed. You should be absolutely bummed that things are the way they are right now with BYU, with the quarterback situation. But I think it's looking up. Their defense is getting way better. We've heard it all through camp. The Jay Hill scheme takes a long time to figure out. That's the same scheme that Kalani's comfortable with. It was not the same scheme that Elisa Tuiaki was running before he got run out of town. So I think as a whole, the team is on the same page when it comes to the defense. I want to see the freaking run game get figured out. I want this to be competitive, not just in the whole conference. I want BYU and Utah to be competitive at the top too.
I agree, and I think that BYU is a team that is in better position this year to be competitive in all 12 games, but what concerns me the most is at quarterback, you noted that, Jake Retzlaff, Gary Bohannon. I'm giving the edge right now to Jake Retzlaff. I've kind of flipped a little bit. Midway through camp, I thought it was Gary Bohannon, but the more momentum is building for Jake Retzlaff, and that makes sense to me, but I'm not feeling good about that, because he's 0-4, and I just feel like there's got to be a quick leash on Jake Retzlaff if he does get that first snap, and Gary Bohannon's got to be ready. And it is crazy, Alex, to think the only quarterback in this Big 12 that has a Big 12 championship on his resume is Gary Bohannon. The only other guy that's won a P4 conference is Cam Rising. So BYU and Utah are the only two programs in this league this year.
That's why you pitch it. That's why you pitch it. All right, look, there are two conference champions in the P4 in this room right now. Who is it? Nobody remembers Gary Bohannon from that 2021 season. Okay, so but look, I got caught up in going back and watching his highlights from 2019 and 2021 when he had the bulk of his work done there. So yeah. Anyway, you can get caught up in all these things, but the fact that we don't get to see really anything is a huge part of it, and so it's a lot of guessing right now. But who's going to be really bad in this conference? The question is, who's going to be really bad in this conference? I think ASU is one that legitimately has a bunch of work still to do. Other than that, Houston might be struggling also a little bit, but who knows? I mean, remember how bad they were last year, and they kind of hung with Texas like for 5 minutes before. Not 5 minutes. It was a decent freaking game. So I think anybody in this league can figure it out, except for teams like Arizona State. And BYU gets lumped in with that group, by the way, of teams that are not going to be anywhere. And I think that you got to be a little bit more reserved about that if you're somebody from out of the market.
Arizona State, to me, is going to be better in the trenches. But, yes, long road to go for Kenny
Dillingham's going to be a great coach.
I think so.
But it's going to take a minute because he's cleaning up an absolute freaking mess left by Herm Edwards.
And Houston, Willie Fritz, it's transfer portal heavy. Donovan Smith, though, he might be that guy next February where there's sudden buzz about him as an NFL draft, maybe first-round guy, potentially huge upside with just the measurables, the cliches with him at quarterback, but still, there's not much around him. I think Houston's the seller this year, but I think also Cincinnati. I'm not impressed with Scott Satterfield. I always thought that was a questionable hire on the heels of Luke Fickell. Like, Cincinnati was rolling. They were one of the best programs in the nation.
Luke Fickell might come back at this point, too.
Maybe. He should not have left.
Oh, my goodness.
He would be doing great at Cincinnati.
He'd be in the P4. He could be at the top of the Big 12 and going to the college football playoff where he had already gotten Cincinnati. And I'll tell you, too, I get worried about all of the top head. The thing about what's crazy about this conference is think about what made the Pac-12 so good last year. What was it? Quarterback play.
Yes.
An insane list of quarterbacks. In the Big 12, it's that list of, and it's very cliche, although it hasn't always been like this. There have been a lot of great wideouts and quarterbacks that have come out of the Big 12 recently. Mm-hmm. But now, look at all the guys that were at Big 12 Media Day that were running backs this year. Look at all the guys.
It's RBU in this league.
Yes, it is. And you know what? It's going to be, and so that. What I'm saying is you can't freak out too much about that quarterback play. Now, who is the best quarterback in the conference, though?
I would say Shedeur Sanders, and then right there next to him is probably Cam Rising.
Where does Noah Fafita live?
Noah Fafita, though, too. I mean, maybe I go Noah Fafita.
I'm telling you right now.
Yeah.
At least we have a bigger body of work from him. Somebody who we don't have a lot of body of work from, that frankly was stealing the starting job from Will Howard before he left Kansas State.
Yes.
By the way, why is Ohio State at the top of the freaking list when they named a starter who probably would have been the backup this year at Kansas State? Avery Johnson is going to be good this year. He is going to be very good this year. And that makes for a really interesting conversation because if you're BYU and you can get the run game going, LJ Martin could be on the list with really, really good running backs. Hinckley Ropati is a very, very good talent that we just haven't seen much from.
Yeah.
So do I see BYU going 2-7 in the conference this year? Probably not. But I don't have them doing much better. I have them in that 6-6 range.
Me too. I've got them 6-6, but they're going to need an upset or two to make that happen to get to 6. Otherwise, it could be another bowlless season for BYU. When you bring up the quarterbacks, I just think Shedeur Sanders, Noah Fafita, Cam Rising, even Alan Bowman, who I don't think's great, but man, he's a solid quarterback. Josh Hoover comes back at TCU. Donovan Smith. The quarterbacks are great. The running backs are awesome in this league. I mean, you just go down the list of these: Devin Neal, Taj Brooks, Dylan Edwards comes in from Colorado, DJ Giddens. This is the star power, the skill position talent, the college football 25 fan will love the Big 12 because it's going to be glamorous on that front for this league. But I'm curious, who outside of Utah and K-State do you think are the playoff contenders in this league?
I have a really hard time putting Oklahoma State in this conversation.
Me too.
And removing them because, they had a look, Bowman, who is, by the way, can we get off of the BYU's got old people in the program train? Since Cam Rising's 100 years old, and so is Alan Bowman, and so, you know.
But I mean, Bohanon's up there, though, still.
I know,
so.
that's what I'm saying. But I just am, I'm one of those guys that thinks that Mike Gundy has the same thing going for him that Kyle Whittingham does, which is he has a system set up, and he has expectations, and they always overperform even when they don't have necessarily the best talent. But I'm not going to hang my hat on a team like Oklahoma State who does not have a quarterback. And I don't think they do.
And also their recruiting is taking a step backwards. I mean, it was once always annually top 25. Now it's 50, 55.
Well,
and
look, how far are you going to get when you tell players, don't negotiate your NIL deals anymore? It's all about football now. By the way, that'll get him in trouble. That is a bad deal.
The thing is, I think we all agree with it. Like, I kind of like,
I would love it.
I'm like, thank you. Like,
I would love it.
Honest, but you just can't do it because
the head
these
coach
players
can't
get
say that
offended.
stuff. No, the head coach has got to be like, and look, you know how it is here. Anytime you listen in the radio, in this market, all these coaches are going, hey, local players, what do you want? I mean, we'll give it to you, man. Like, what do you need? Because they're trying to steal the local talent from one another. And the good news is the talent here in Utah on the prep level is freaking good. All right, you should steal all the best players on the prep side as you can, and then take all the good players you can out of the transfer portal as much as you can. Use all of it. And that's why even, Kyle Whittingham can poo-poo things at the beginning of like the NIL and transfer portal, but Utah is undeniably using it very, very well to their advantage.
I would also add in the playoff contender conversation for this league, Iowa State.
Why is Matt Campbell not getting the respect this year
I think this team is going to be really good. I think are going to be better than their 2020 team that reached the Fiesta Bowl. Even last year, Matt Campbell said this team had signs of that group with Brock Purdy and that talented squad that they had. He saw the signs there. They were just really young. And then Rocco Beck emerged. It worked out brilliantly for them that they had that gambling scandal because Deckers would have been the quarterback, but then Beck becomes the best freshman quarterback in the league, and then Abu Sama was a revelation late in the season.
You don't have to convince BYU fans that Iowa State's going to be any good. But I'm telling you, like,
they're going to be really good, though, this year. I have them beating Utah.
Guess who, Matt? I said that at one point, and I got hosed by Utah listeners who were pissed. But
because they could win 13-9.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. Now, that might have been the case against a Bryson Barnes, Nate Johnson run offense last year for Utah.
Win more,
There could be a little bit more on the offensive side for the Utes, but I think that Iowa State, Matt Campbell is straight up copying off of what Kyle Whittingham does.
Yeah,
he's like, I steal all of his good ideas. I try, and look, that's not a bad place to go. One of the most tenured coaches in all the college game, and they got two of them, by the way, in this league with Mike Gundy and Kyle Whittingham. So that. They are a sleeper team. They don't. To me, they're not championship contender. They're the sleeper team that could show up. If you would have told BYU fans, hey, they went 7-6, they felt like a 10-3 team last year.
Yeah.
When they came into Provo and hung it on them, right? And Abu Sama seemed like he was going to be, and they're going to be. Look, they're going to be good. They are going to be good. UCF, watch out for those guys. They're going to be a lot better. They're bringing back, who's their running back who was out last year who ran for 1,500 yards the year before?
They got R.J. Harvey back. Penny Boone's back, too.
Yes, and then there's a Toledo kid, right? Their wideout that came from Toledo is like who basically.
Penny Boone.
Yeah,
Penny
that's
Boone.
it. Yeah, so
Penny Boone.
Phenomenal. It's going to be a good team. Now, those aren't contenders. Those are dark horses for me. Contenders are Kansas State, Kansas. And I even have a hard time with Kansas. And I'll put a distant fourth behind with Arizona because Arizona, I'm glad they have their two big dudes, McMillan and Fafita. Great, but they had 28 guys leaving the transfer portal, and they lost their head coach. And I know that Brennan is going to be good out of San Jose State. I think he's a good coach, but they might need a minute. But Noah Fafita and McMillan, those two guys are going to go for. They're gonna connect for 1,500 yards.
Arizona screams to me that program that just could be that classic Big 12 team that slides after a big year. And T-Mac, we got to kind of question like what's his health status. There's been rumblings about will he be available. He's gone through practices and had some 11-on-11 work, but with a no contact jersey on. How healthy is T-Mac? That's going to be a big question for Arizona. But yeah, they got talent. I mean, Jacob Manu comes back to Cario Davis, stepping out of the portal and returning back at the secondary. That was a big get. I had him as a preseason all Big 12 pick at cornerback for Arizona. So I think that that's going to be a good team. I think a team knocking on the door is West Virginia. they were really good last year, but they also had a great favorable schedule. They played all 4 newcomers. This year, the schedule is a gauntlet. They open up with Penn State. They've got at Oklahoma State, K-State, Iowa State, at Arizona, UCF, at Texas Tech. Look, I think people are still sleeping a little bit on West Virginia.
But Garrett Green is not a mystery like he was last year.
Right.
And that's a big deal. He had a great year, overperformed what they thought he was going to do. The entire West Virginia team overperformed. I mean, we had them winning 2 or 3 games, and they won 9.
They might have one of the best NFL draft picks at offensive tackle, Wyatt Millen, along the offensive line. But I just think they take a little bit of a step back. I still think they go to a bowl, but I think West Virginia takes a step back. But this league's just going to be loaded, Alex, and I think it's just going to be entertaining, competitive football. I just think you got to hope, though, you get 2 in the playoff, and it sets the table for, a fun run. Like, long-term about this league, what does it become after 2031? Nobody knows. If we all knew, we would be laying that down. But, I think that this conference has got the ability to be a really entertaining product. And I do believe your Mark when he says they're going to get better this year, because I thought last year was very underwhelming. We were following it every single week, and it was just a bunch of 7-5, 8-4 football teams. And it was like, is there anyone worth the ding that's going to compete with Texas?
It was
here?
the worst kind of parity too, because they were like, oh, it's got so much parity in this league. I was like, oh, it's because all the teams are inconsistent. You have no idea who's going to win, because week to week, TCU could blow out BYU and then get blown out the next week, which is exactly what happened. So yeah, I don't know. I don't buy into Kansas like everybody else says, because I'm so over the Jalen Daniels, the promise.
I'm bought into Kansas.
Listen. The promise of Jalen Daniels and the ghost of Christmas future of Jalen Daniels, I can't freaking stand it, because in the same breath that these guys go, no, Cam Rising, I can't put him. He's a top 6 quarterback in the league. He's maybe the 6th best, because we just haven't seen him in a while. I'm like, Jalen Daniels hasn't done jack squat except for being a preseason,
He had the Apple Watch around his neck.
Yes, come on. I don't know why everybody loves that guy so much, and maybe it's because out of the 2 Kansas schools, I like Chris Kleiman more than I do Lance Leipold. But
BYU fans probably agree.
But that doesn't mean anything. The Jayhawks have just never, having them come around and try to get used to them being a football power is hard to do in my head.
I will say, losing Andy Kotelnicki to Penn State as the OC, they bring in Jeff Grimes.
But Jeff Grimes got fired by one of the worst teams in the league to be the OC there.
They maintain the whole assistant coaches around him. It doesn't feel like it's going to be a revamped look. It's going to be that same playbook. Grimes, I think, adds value to the offensive line that gets retooled. 3 new offensive linemen. I just think that, Kansas, to me, they got a schedule, too, that's set up pretty well. I think they can get to Arlington this year, and it hinges on Jalen Daniels.
Who's performing at halftime, though? Is Nelly going to be there again?
That's a great question.
You got to overdo it yourself. You got to outdo yourself again this year. Mark?
I'm trying to think, because they did have what he said, the highest ratings at the at halftime.
Yeah.
Nelly,
listen, get Cardi B in here. Let's go. That's my next choice.
I was thinking Ciara, because that's early 2000s. Get Ciara.
Are her and Russell still together?
Oh yeah,
okay.
she's still with Russell Wilson. Who they'll have to do it big. I mean, it's one of the tentpole events in the Big 12.
I love how you put on your Mark voice for it.
It's going to be great. So this year, 1st and 12 is going to be great, Alex. You can listen to us every Sunday live over the air on KSL News Radio and the KSL Sports Zone in Salt Lake, 102.7 FM, 1160 AM and 97.5 FM. But, of course, here on the podcast as well.
Yeah, we're going to do it all. I mean, now that BYU and Utah are in there together, we're going to break down both local teams kind of premierly, but then the rest of the league gets all the coverage.
We'll have power rankings every week. We'll break down the headlines. We'll have Big 12 Sound Roundup. And how we went this whole show not talking Colorado?
It was on purpose.
Yep.
I already knew where you were going.
Yep.
They're going to get enough attention this year, okay? Do I need to bring up that Coach Prime was this close to being a Saudi Arabian national after they tried to get all that money of the Saudi PIF fund?
I think the Big 12 fans, though, listening to this show are like, okay, we're all in on these guys if you just listen to us for the first time, because we were talking about the real football teams that are going to be near the top of this league. Look, Colorado's going to be good. I think Colorado's going bowling.
Hey, no disrespect to you, man. No disrespect, but CBS did me wrong.
Look, I had no prime with Coach Prime calling out that Denver Post columnist because honestly, it seemed like the Denver Post columnist was his questioning, looking back at things where, hey, Jordan C., are you ever getting harassed as a freshman?
Boy.
And you go, what is this guy's slant?
What's his move?
I get what Coach Prime is doing. I'm okay with that.
Do you believe?
I like Coach Prime. I don't buy into them though being in the upper tier. I look at them near kind of the just middle of the pack, going for a bowl game. I think Shedeur Sanders is going to be awesome. I feel like Travis Hunter's the best football player in college football.
So then they'll get 5 wins this year, and then Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter go on to the NFL, and then what?
That's the big question because...
And then Deion is going to be the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys.
They haven't done much in high school recruiting to make me think that he's there long term. So we'll see. Colorado, though, they play the Utes. They don't play BYU, so we don't get much local connections to Colorado.
It's still the
this
last game of the year, right? Because it's the Rocky Mountain Oyster Cup.
Rumble in the Rockies.
Come on.
The Utes and the Buffs. But it's going to be a fun year.
I'm excited,
of Big 12.
Mitch.
We're going to have a lot of fun. And subscribe to this podcast. Leave a 5-star rating and a review. Download the KSL Sports app. And we will talk to you on Sunday, September 1st, 10 a.m. to noon live. And then here on the podcast as well. Talk to you then. And we'll have a great Big 12 football season here on 1st and 12.